Hey there, sleepyheads. If you're here right now, maybe it's late, and your mind just needed a softer place to land. Maybe you're lying in bed, scrolling under dim lights, looking for something calm, familiar, maybe even comforting. If so, you're exactly where you should be. Tonight, we're not just talking about SpongeBob. We're going back to a feeling quiet mornings, warm blankets, cartoons playing softly in the background. Back when life felt lighter. So, take a breath. Let the day fade. Pull your blanket a little closer. And let's begin. The first time you saw Bikini Bottom probably wasn't a big moment. You might not even remember the exact episode. Maybe you'd just gotten home from school, kind of worn out, tossing your backpack somewhere near the couch because the day felt too long already. The TV flickered on before you even sat down. That soft glow filled the living room like it always did. And there it was, bright yellow, a little silly, oddly calming. That upbeat theme song faded into the afternoon, like it knew the day had been rough. It didn't ask anything from you. It just let you breathe. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Back then, you didn't overthink it. SpongeBob was just there, a friend waiting inside the TV. Nothing dramatic, just sound and color, easy to follow, easy to forget. You might have still had your shoes on. Maybe the sun outside was setting a little earlier than usual. You could hear distant cars outside, and the fridge humming somewhere behind you. Homework sat untouched. But right then, it didn't matter. The town underwater felt louder than your thoughts, but in a strangely gentle way. Something about that moment stayed. Maybe you didn't know it, but that world had a rhythm. The kind that made time slow down. You weren't analyzing plot or character. You were just resting. Even if no one said it out loud, a lot of us used cartoons as a kind of breath. Not deep or meaningful, just enough to float for a while. That feeling didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because sometimes the shows you watch when you're tired become more than entertainment. They become memory, like how you still remember the colors, the way laughter bounced off watery walls, the way SpongeBob's voice sort of made the air feel warmer. You might have laughed, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just listened, and listening was enough. But that wasn't where it ended. Looking back now, it kind of feels like Bikini Bottom was waiting for you. Like it knew you needed a place where nothing felt too serious. A place where jellyfish fields were endless. Where friendships didn't need explanations. Where every day started with a smile that didn't have to be perfect. And when you think about it now, years later, you don't really remember the stories. You remember the feeling. You might have felt something like this before. The quiet comfort of something familiar, even if you couldn't explain why. It was never about escaping the real world completely. It was more like stepping into a softer version of it, where failure was funny, not painful, where sadness didn't last, where even the grumpy neighbor had a place in the story. Almost like the ocean accepted everyone, even the parts of us we didn't talk about. And maybe that's why the first glimpse of Bikini Bottom stayed in your memory, even if you didn't realize it. Some memories don't shout. They stay quiet, like waves rolling in the distance. They wait for you to grow up before they make sense. But that feeling only grew stronger later. Maybe it was never just a cartoon. Maybe It was a doorway into a version of life that felt safe, the kind you could step into after school, when the world felt loud and expectations pressed in. You didn't need perfect grades there. You didn't need to have it all figured out. You just needed to show up, and somehow that was enough. Maybe it still is. Saturday mornings had a different kind of air to them. Even before you opened your eyes, the world somehow felt slower. The sunlight didn't rush in. It slipped quietly through the curtains, like it knew not to wake you too fast. Maybe you could hear the distant sound of birds outside, or the creak of the house settling. But nothing felt urgent. Not like school mornings, not like weekdays. Saturdays had their own heartbeat. You might have wandered into the living room, hair messy, socks half on, just following the soft glow of the TV in the distance. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The fridge hummed gently behind you, almost as if it was waking up too. A cereal box waited on the counter, like it always did. Sometimes you'd eat right out of the bowl, while sitting on the floor, knees pulled close, eyes fixed on the screen. And there it was, Nickelodeon. SpongeBob starting up again, like it never really ended overnight, just paused until you were ready to return. There was something comforting about that predictable rhythm. Theme song, laughter, underwater echoes, bright colors that didn't hurt your eyes. Something about that moment stayed. You didn't need permission to rest. You didn't need a plan for the day. Those cartoons felt like a world that kept going without you, yet still welcomed you when you showed up. You might have heard your parents making coffee in the kitchen, or the distant rumble of a lawnmower down the street, but it didn't pull you away. That hour between waking up and facing the day felt like a secret pocket of time, one that expected nothing from you. But that wasn't where it ended. There was a rhythm to Bikini Bottom that matched those mornings. Not fast, not slow, just steady. It felt like someone quietly saying, "You can relax now." And maybe that's what made it more than a cartoon. Real life didn't always give you stillness, but SpongeBob somehow did. Even the characters moved like they weren't rushing anywhere. Their world didn't demand perfection. It just let things be a little chaotic without feeling overwhelming. Kind of like childhood itself, messy but safe. You might have felt something like this before. That gentle pause before the day truly begins. As the cereal softened in the bowl, you could almost feel your thoughts softening too. Saturday mornings gave you permission to slow down. No grades to worry about. No deadlines. Just floating. Almost like the characters underwater. Looking back, maybe that's why so many memories from those mornings feel warmer. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing needed to be. But that feeling only grew stronger later. Sometimes, rest isn't sleep. Sometimes, it's just the absence of pressure. Bikini Bottom didn't try to fix your mood. It didn't even ask how you were feeling. It simply existed, and let you exist alongside it. Maybe that's why those mornings linger in our minds. The slow pace, the soft light, the cereal crunching as cartoons began their loops again. You didn't analyze anything back then? You just let it play. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. As years passed, Saturday mornings got shorter. Responsibilities crept in. Plans filled the early hours. But the memory stayed. The feeling of sitting on the floor, bare feet on the carpet, eyes half open but heart strangely steady. That was the rhythm Bikini Bottom understood. A peaceful kind of noise that held your thoughts gently instead of crowding them. Even now, when life gets loud, that memory still knows how to knock softly on the door of your mind. And maybe that's why Bikini Bottom felt right, even before we knew why. Maybe it was reminding us of something we needed, that rest doesn't always mean stopping. Sometimes it just means letting everything be quiet enough to hear yourself think. And maybe that's all we were ever looking for. Some memories don't begin with sounds. They begin with color. Back then, you probably didn't think about the way Bikini Bottom looked. You just watched. But looking back now, the colors were never overwhelming. They didn't shout. They kind of whispered. The ocean wasn't a harsh blue. It was softer, like a calm breath. The yellows didn't glare at you. They glowed. Even the sky seemed to move slowly, like it knew you needed time to settle into the day. But that wasn't the strange part yet. You might have been too tired after school to notice any of it. Maybe you dropped your backpack in the hallway, headed straight to the couch, and just let the colors wash over you. It felt natural, like sunlight through half-closed blinds, or that sleepy moment when the TV became the only light in the room. You felt it before you understood it. Or maybe you didn't feel it at all. But your mind did. It absorbed the softness, quietly, without asking. Something about that moment stayed. Maybe that's why, even now, certain shades remind you of those afternoons. A specific blue in the sky, a gentle yellow on an old t-shirt. Colors have a way of carrying feelings that words don't always reach, and Bikini Bottom seemed to understand that. How visual comfort could settle your thoughts before your heart even caught up. There was no effort in watching, no analysis, just soaking in the palette of a world that felt strangely safe. But that wasn't where it ended. When you think about it now, you can kind of feel what those colors were saying. They felt like a reminder that not everything had to be loud to matter. Like emotions could exist without explanations. SpongeBob's yellow wasn't just cheerful. It felt like warmth. The ocean's blue wasn't just scenery. It felt like calm. Maybe the show didn't speak to us through dialogue at all. Maybe it spoke through color, softly, patiently, like someone waiting for us to notice, even if it took years. You might have felt something like this before, without knowing why. Sometimes, the smallest details are the ones that linger the longest. You don't always remember the storyline, but you remember how a scene felt. The hue of the sky at the end of an episode, the way jellyfish glowed against the water, the pastel tones that never rushed. These things lived quietly in your memory, like tiny pieces of emotional code. Not urgent, just present. But the feeling only grew stronger later. Maybe someone designed it that way, knowing kids needed a place that didn't feel overwhelming, where colors didn't attack your senses, where brightness didn't demand attention. It simply welcomed it. Even if life outside the screen felt confusing, the underwater world stayed steady. Predictable. Gentle enough to let your thoughts rest for a while. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Years later, you can look at a single scene and almost feel the temperature of that moment. The slow blues, the kind yellows. Even Squidward's house had tones that reflected a kind of tiredness, muted, but familiar. Color wasn't just decoration. It was storytelling. And maybe that's why Bikini Bottom stayed with you long after the episodes faded. It didn't try to capture your attention. It simply gave your mind something peaceful to hold on to. And maybe that's the reason those memories stayed. Not because they were loud, but because they were gentle. The colors didn't need to shout to be heard. They already knew your heart was listening. Sometimes, healing doesn't speak in full sentences. Sometimes, it speaks in quiet colors. Some evenings felt heavier than others. Not dramatic, just tiring. The kind of days when you kept things quiet because explaining them would take too much energy. Maybe you came home after school, dropped onto the couch, and didn't say much for a while. You probably didn't think of it as escape, but the TV glow somehow felt like the only place your mind could slow down. That soft light filled the room, like it knew how to catch you before you fell too far into your thoughts. But that wasn't the strange part yet. When SpongeBob came on, something shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly. It was quieter than that, like turning a corner in your mind and finding a street where nobody asked questions. You didn't need to smile. You didn't need to understand everything going on inside you. You just needed to let the colors and laughter drift across the living room, the way sunlight moves across a wall in the afternoon. Something about that moment stayed. There were nights when the world outside felt a little too sharp. Maybe arguments echoed faintly from another room. Maybe school felt bigger than you could handle. You could hear cars passing outside, headlights sliding across the blinds. The TV didn't erase anything. It just softened the edges. Bikini Bottom felt like a place that existed slightly out of reach, but never out of care. A quieter version of life, where problems didn't linger as long as they did in the real world. But that wasn't where it ended. Sitting there, sometimes with the lights off, it felt like the TV knew what kind of day you'd had. Episodes blended together into something like background breathing. Your thoughts didn't disappear, but they didn't shout as loudly anymore. You could just sit, and sit, and sit, until you felt steady again. Maybe you never called it peace, but you felt closer to it than before. Maybe you felt something like this before, without having the words for it. That feeling only grew stronger later. Looking back, it's easy to think cartoons were just noise. But maybe they were a kind of language, one that made space for emotions you couldn't name yet. A language where kindness was simple, and existence didn't require explanation. SpongeBob never asked why someone felt sad. He just showed up, ready to help. His world didn't fix everything, but it offered room to breathe through it. And sometimes, rest doesn't mean solving problems. It just means being allowed not to pretend. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because even now, when life piles up and thoughts get heavy, memories of those TV-lit evenings glow like tiny reminders that once, even for a moment, you found stillness. Maybe that's why the glow still lingers in your mind. Not because it erased what you felt, but because it let you feel it without judgment. Maybe Bikini Bottom wasn't escape. Maybe it was understanding, silent, but present. And maybe that's what comfort really is. Not erasing pain, but letting it rest. Letting it breathe, letting it exist without shame. The couch, the blanket, the quiet flicker of the screen. None of it solved your problems. But somehow, they helped you carry them. Maybe that's what the TV glow was really doing all along, holding space when you didn't have the strength to. That quiet companionship is hard to forget. Late at night, when everything goes quiet, sounds feel different. The house settles. The fridge hums gently behind you. Distant cars pass outside like moving whispers. It's in those quiet hours, when thoughts stretch out a little too far, that imagination doesn't feel so unreachable. Maybe that's when the ocean in Bikini Bottom first felt real. Not just drawn or animated, but alive in a way that didn't need proof. Kind of like breathing you didn't know you were paying attention to. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The sound of waves has its own language. They rise, they fall, and they leave space in between. Space that almost feels like someone saying, "It's all right." Not loudly. Just enough to remind you that stillness doesn't have to be scary. Even in a cartoon, the ocean always felt like it was doing more than just being water. It carried something unspoken, like the emotions kids didn't have words for yet. Maybe it already knew what we needed before we did. Something about that moment stayed. Sometimes you'd be lying on the couch, half asleep, eyes starting to close, while Bikini Bottom drifted across the screen. You weren't really watching anymore. You were floating. The characters talked, laughed, moved, but the ocean stayed steady, patient, predictable. It didn't ask anything from you. It just stayed, like a quiet presence in the room. Maybe you've felt something like this before, the kind of silence that understands without needing to interrupt. But that wasn't where it ended. Looking back, maybe the ocean wasn't listening with ears. Maybe it heard in a different way. The way silence hears emotions when words get tangled. There were moments in childhood when sadness didn't have a name. Moments when you didn't know how to explain what was wrong, or why everything felt heavier than it should have. But the waves kept breathing on screen, as if they were saying, "You're still here. That means something." That feeling only grew stronger later. Cartoons didn't feel real, yet somehow they held real feelings. Maybe that's why Bikini Bottom stayed in memory longer than expected. It was never just a goofy town underwater. It was a place that listened without questioning. In life, that kind of listening is rare. When someone hears you without asking for a reason, that's what comfort feels like. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. As you grew older, you started noticing things you hadn't seen before. The tiredness in Squidward's voice, the hope inside SpongeBob's laughter. But the ocean never changed. It remained the same steady pulse behind everything. Almost like time itself had a heartbeat there. Maybe that's why it became so memorable. Not because of what it said, but because of what it allowed to rest. Maybe Bikini Bottom wasn't just animated water. Maybe it was a mirror, showing the calm we wanted, even when we didn't know how to ask for it. When the real world felt too sharp, the ocean stayed round and soft. Waves moved slowly, reminding us that not everything has to be rushed. Not every feeling needs an explanation. And maybe, just maybe, silence doesn't mean emptiness. Maybe it means someone is listening. Maybe it means it's safe to stop running. For just a moment. That's the kind of listening the ocean offered. The kind that holds you steady. The kind that only makes sense when you lie awake at night and think back. There was always something different about Patrick. Not loud, not intense, just steady. He felt like the kind of friend who never rushed anything, the kind who could sit beside you without saying a word and still make you feel less alone. As a kid, you probably didn't explain it. You just felt calmer when he was on screen. His presence had a way of slowing time down, like the air itself softened when he appeared. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Some characters carried the story forward. Patrick didn't. He just existed, peacefully, almost aimlessly. But maybe that was the point. He didn't try to figure everything out. He didn't chase answers. He simply accepted the moment he was in, no matter how ridiculous or confusing. And weirdly, that felt familiar. Like someone you had met before. Someone who made life feel easier just by being around. Something about that feeling stayed. For people who never fit in perfectly, Patrick made it feel okay to be different. There was no pressure with him, no expectations. Even when things went wrong, he didn't panic. He just blinked, waited, then smiled again. Maybe that's why his presence felt comforting, especially on days when your thoughts felt like tangled knots. You didn't need to explain your emotions to him. You didn't even need to understand them yourself. Patrick quietly proved that not knowing everything doesn't mean you're failing. But that wasn't where it ended. As you got older, you started realizing why characters like Patrick mattered. Real life often feels like a test you weren't ready for. People move fast, expectations pile up, mistakes feel loud. But Patrick never chased perfection. He didn't need to. He had something deeper, ease, a kind of unspoken wisdom that didn't come from knowledge, but from stillness. Maybe you've felt something like this before, when someone's calm made your own mind slow down. That feeling only grew stronger later. Patrick didn't fix problems. He didn't even understand them most of the time. But somehow, he made them feel less heavy. Kindness isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just someone who doesn't make you feel wrong for being confused. Someone who doesn't rush to fill the silence. Someone who stays, even when there's nothing left to say. Even kids can feel that kind of comfort, without needing to name it. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward, as life moved forward, and noise grew louder. Memories of Patrick felt oddly grounding. He represented a kind of peace that didn't need to explain itself. A reminder that softness doesn't equal weakness. That being lost doesn't make you broken. That existing, simply existing, can be enough. Watching him just be made it easier to let your thoughts slow down too. And maybe that's why he felt familiar from the start. Maybe he reminded us of someone we once knew, or a part of ourselves we forgot about. The part that didn't need to perform, the part that didn't need answers to feel worthy, the part that could still laugh at nothing and feel okay with everything. Some people assume wisdom comes from knowing things, but maybe real wisdom is being comfortable with not knowing anything at all. Patrick seemed to understand that, even if he didn't say it. He taught it without words, without effort, without trying to be anything more than himself. And sometimes, that's exactly what we needed. When we were younger, Squidward was funny. Grumpy, irritated, always bothered by something. He seemed like the character you were supposed to laugh at, the one who never got it. SpongeBob was joy. Patrick was ease. Squidward was noise. But something about him changes as you grow up. His voice sounds different now. Not angry, just tired, almost like someone who used to dream bigger but didn't know how to keep those dreams alive. But that wasn't the strange part yet. As a kid, you didn't think about backstories. But these days, you kind of look at Squidward and see pieces of adulthood in him. The early mornings, the routines, the quiet disappointment that no one really talks about. You can picture his alarm clock going off before sunrise, his clarinet by the door, the same work shift waiting every day. That rhythm doesn't feel funny anymore. It feels familiar. Something about that feeling stayed. Maybe it's the small apartment he goes home to, the way he sits alone at the end of the day, the sighs he lets out when no one's listening, things you didn't notice before. Now they sort of stand out. He wasn't failing. He was just tired. And sometimes adults don't complain because it wouldn't change anything. They just keep moving through the day, hoping something might feel different eventually, even if it never does. But that wasn't where it ended. You can almost hear the quiet in his house. The fridge humming, floorboards creaking, maybe the faint sound of neighbors through the walls. It's the sound of growing up, without a big moment to show for it. Maybe Squidward represented the first glimpse of adulthood that we didn't understand yet. The kind that creeps in slowly, without permission. The kind that leaves you wondering if happiness has an age limit. You might have felt something like this before, when dreams start to feel too heavy to carry, but letting go feels even worse. That feeling only grew stronger later. His clarinet wasn't a joke. It was a memory of what he wanted once, a quiet echo of something he used to believe in. Everyone has something like that, a talent, a dream, a plan, tucked away in a room no one visits anymore. Squidward didn't stop caring. He just didn't know how to keep caring without breaking. And maybe that says more about life than most cartoons ever try to. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because the more you grow up, the more you start seeing Squidward as something else. Not a failed adult, but someone who still shows up. Someone who keeps living, even if it's not perfect. Someone who, deep down, still hopes for better days. In that way, he might be the most real character in Bikini Bottom. Not a warning, not a joke. Just a reminder that sometimes surviving is more heroic than succeeding. And maybe that's why these days he doesn't seem so wrong anymore. Maybe you even understand him now. His silence, his sighs, his tired smile when no one's looking. Maybe Squidward was never the grumpy one. Maybe he was just the first to grow up. And maybe he was hoping we'd catch up eventually. There's a certain kind of quiet that only exists after a place closes for the day. You can almost picture it. The Krusty Krab at night. Lights dimmed just enough to make shadows stretch across the floor. The fryers finally resting. The grill cooling down. The scent of sea salt and grease slowly fading into stillness. You don't see anyone there, but it doesn't feel empty. More like the building itself is breathing, taking in its own kind of quiet. But that wasn't the strange part yet. If you close your eyes, you can kind of imagine the back room door creaking, maybe a mop leaning against the wall, maybe the register light blinking faintly in the dark, like it refuses to fall fully asleep. There's a heartbeat in places like that. Not loud, not clear, but steady. The kind of rhythm routines create over time. As kids, we only thought of the Krusty Krab as a place for jokes and orders and chaos. But maybe it was something more than that. Something about that feeling stayed. Even when no one's inside, places like that still hold the day they just lived. All the footsteps, all the conversations, all the tiny moments most people forgot before they even walked out the door. And maybe that's why the Krusty Krab feels strangely comforting. It was predictable. Every day opened and closed the same way. Work had meaning, friendships stayed close, and the night never felt too empty. But that wasn't where it ended. There was an order to Bikini Bottom that made it feel safe. Not perfect, just steady. SpongeBob would show up excited. Squidward would clock in reluctantly. Mr. Krabs would be counting something. The world had its rhythm, its roles, its patterns that rarely broke. And for kids watching, that kind of consistency meant something, even if they didn't realize it. It meant that no matter what kind of day you had, tomorrow had a place waiting for you. You might have felt something like this before, when a routine quietly held your life together. That feeling only grew stronger later. As you grew up, real routines got louder, harder, more complicated. Jobs weren't always joyful. Expectations stacked up. But the Krusty Krab stayed simple, a world where effort mattered, and friendship showed up between shifts. It didn't promise greatness. It just promised that showing up had value. And maybe that's why imagining it at night feels peaceful. Knowing it's still there. Doing what it does best. Exhaling. Waiting for morning. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because the older you get, the more you realize how rare it is to find places that feel alive after the noise stops. Places that keep their warmth even after the lights go off. The Krusty Krab felt like one of those places, not because it kept the world entertained, but because it taught us something simple. Even ordinary spaces can hold extraordinary meaning when they're part of your routine. Maybe that's why we still remember it. Not as a building, but as a feeling. A reminder that stability has its own kind of magic. That footsteps echo differently when the day is over. That quiet doesn't always mean empty. And maybe, just maybe, you can still hear it if you listen closely enough. The faint fryer cooling, the mop water settling, the register ticking ever so softly in the dark. The sound of a day ending, and the quiet promise that another one will begin. The world of Bikini Bottom always followed certain patterns, not announced, not explained, just quietly present. Even as kids, we could sense them in the background. SpongeBob would always try his best. Patrick would keep things simple. Squidward would stay exhausted. Mr. Krabs would chase something he could never quite get enough of. Sandy would build and learn and push forward. No one said these rules out loud, but somehow they always held. But that wasn't the strange part yet. It didn't feel scripted. It felt natural, like the town was designed around unwritten laws. Not about society, but about people. About us, each character moving inside their own little circle, looping through familiar motions, never really breaking their patterns. And yet, they didn't seem upset about it. Not really. It felt like they all understood something we didn't. That life isn't always about getting somewhere. Sometimes, it's just about existing, honestly, inside the space you're given. Something about that idea stayed. Maybe that's why Bikini Bottom felt familiar before we could explain why. SpongeBob's constant effort echoed the part of us that still hopes. Patrick's simplicity mirrored the part of us that just wants rest. Squidward's sighs showed the tired part, the one we don't talk about. Mr. Krabs reminded us of our urges to chase things, even when we're not sure why. And Sandy, she was the voice that kept pushing us forward when we were ready to listen. But that wasn't where it ended. Looking back, it almost feels like Bikini Bottom was built like a psychological map. A landscape of feelings moving through daily routines. Each character was a different answer to the same silent question. What do we do with the lives we're given? Some chased dreams. Some ran from them. Some sat still. And kids watching, they may have understood more than adults realized. You might have felt something like this before, catching meaning in the smallest details, even if you didn't know how to name it. That feeling only grew stronger later. The truth is, patterns don't always trap us. Sometimes they keep us steady. We repeat things, morning routines, favorite meals, quiet hobbies, not because we're stuck, but because they make the world feel less random. Bikini Bottom didn't judge anyone for staying in their loop. It simply gave each character space to live inside it. Maybe that's what made it strangely comforting, even now. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because watching the show as an adult feels different. You start seeing the layers, the decisions, the quiet truths. You start to realize that every character was dealing with something human. Not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently. They occupied their roles, like emotions do. SpongeBob brightened rooms. Squidward dimmed them. Patrick neutralized everything. And somewhere in between, life unfolded. Maybe that's why silence felt meaningful there. Answers weren't spoken, they were lived. Day after day, routine after routine. The town didn't lecture us. It let us observe. And sometimes, observing is its own kind of understanding. Maybe we knew more as kids than we realized. Maybe Bikini Bottom didn't teach us lessons. It reflected us. Quietly, patiently. Like a mirror underwater. And sometimes, silence carries answers long before words do. That might be why the town never really left our memory. It didn't shout to be remembered. It simply stayed, like a rhythm your mind still recognizes, even after the screen goes dark. Cartoons never said goodbye. They just faded, like the night slowly turning into morning. There was never a big ending. No final statement. No heavy goodbye. Just soft music. A fade to black. And then silence that didn't feel empty. Somehow that kind of ending made things easier. You didn't have to let go. You just had to wait until next time. But that wasn't the strange part yet. As a kid, falling asleep after an episode felt peaceful. The TV glow would dim, leaving the room quieter, but not lonely. It was like the show gently stepped aside and let the night take over. No pressure, no rush, just an understanding that things were slowing down. Maybe you kept the lights low, maybe you curled into a blanket, or maybe you just listened to the stillness of the house, the kind that only exists when everyone else is already asleep. Something about that moment stayed. Episodes never really felt like they ended. They just paused, drifted. The story wasn't gone. It was just waiting somewhere. Maybe that subtle fade-out helped a lot of us fall asleep on nights when thoughts felt too loud. It was easier to rest when you knew tomorrow wouldn't be too different, that Bikini Bottom would still be there, that nothing important would be lost. But that wasn't where it ended. Sometimes, the best comfort comes from predictability, knowing the next episode would start the same familiar way, knowing the characters would still be there, the ocean would still be blue, SpongeBob would still wake up ready to try again. Even the silence after the TV turned off held something kind of warm, like a memory choosing to stay nearby, just in case you needed it again. You might have felt something like this before, that soft blend between today and tomorrow. That feeling only grew stronger later, because as life got busier, real endings became harder. Goodbyes felt heavier. Changes hit faster, but Bikini Bottom never asked you to process anything. It simply waited, like a world that respected your pace, a place that didn't push you away, even when the screen went dark. It didn't vanish. It just stayed underwater, somewhere quiet, until you were ready to return. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. The more you look back, the more that fade-out feels meaningful. It wasn't just part of TV pacing. It was emotional pacing, a gentle way of saying rest is allowed. Tomorrow will come when it's ready. Some people fall asleep to silence. Others fall asleep to the idea of something still existing, just out of reach. The kind of comfort that doesn't demand attention. It just offers presence. Maybe that's why those endings stay in memory. Not because they were grand, but because they were kind. Cartoons didn't need closure the way adults think they do. They only needed space. A slow fade. A moment to exhale. And maybe that's how childhood felt too. Not a door slamming shut, but a gentle drift into whatever came next. No final goodbye. No deep explanation. Just one more breath. One more night. One more soft reminder that tomorrow was waiting. Maybe Bikini Bottom never really turned off. Maybe it just lowered its lights, listened to the quiet, and stayed nearby. Not gone. Just resting. Somewhere underwater, waiting for us to return. When you listen to the ocean, it isn't always the waves that stand out. It's the quiet moments between them, the pauses that almost feel like the water is thinking. That tiny breath before the next wave arrives. Sometimes, that silence says more than the sound ever could. Maybe that's why the ocean in SpongeBob felt peaceful. Even though it was just animation, it still carried a rhythm, a pulse, a way of moving that didn't rush. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Late at night, when your thoughts start moving faster than you want them to, silence can feel intimidating. But ocean silence feels different. Calmer. Kind of like a blanket being pulled over noise. You can almost hear the screen glow as the characters go about their day. The underwater world never needed to be loud. It just was, breathing steadily, giving your thoughts room to slow down, like the ocean was lending you its pace. Something about that moment stayed. As a kid, you probably didn't think much about sound design or pacing. You just felt something settle inside you when the underwater bubbles hummed or the slow ocean wind drifted through the background. Maybe you didn't even notice it, but your breathing did. Your shoulders loosened, your thoughts softened. Sometimes, it's not relaxation you need. It's rhythm, a reason to slow down without feeling like you're failing at life. But that wasn't where it ended. silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's the safest part of the noise. That pause between waves, the moment of stillness before the world starts again, is its own kind of language. And SpongeBob's world used it quietly. It didn't overwhelm you with dialogue. It didn't explain everything. It just existed with you, like a friend sitting nearby, not needing to speak. You might have felt something like this before, when quiet moments felt more healing than conversations ever did. That feeling only grew stronger the later. As life speeds up, we start thinking faster than we feel. Nights get longer, thoughts get tangled, but memories of those ocean sounds linger, the ones that made everything feel softer. The slow fade of a wave, the gentle pause before the next scene. Maybe those moments weren't filler. Maybe they were reminders that you're allowed to breathe, that you don't have to solve everything right away, that even silence can carry comfort. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because when you revisit those episodes now, you might catch details you never noticed before. The gentle hush between footsteps, the slow drift of sea plants just barely moving in the background, the space between words. They give your mind a map, a guide towards slowness, a path back to the kind of calm that doesn't lecture you. It just invites you. And maybe that's what the ocean was trying to tell us all along. That noise isn't the only way to speak. That healing doesn't always need sound. That rest doesn't need permission. Sometimes it's enough to sit with the quiet in between, like a wave patiently returning to shore. Funny how silence can feel like someone's still talking, just softer. Like the ocean heard everything you were worried about and simply answered with a breath. Not a solution, not instructions, just a breath. And maybe that's all you needed to hear. Memory doesn't always work in straight lines. It doesn't store everything. It keeps what mattered, even if you didn't know it mattered at the time. When you think back to Bikini Bottom, you probably don't recall the episode numbers. You don't remember exact dialogue, but you remember how certain scenes felt. The way the room seemed a little warmer. The way your thoughts seemed to slow down without asking permission. That kind of memory isn't built from facts. It's built from feeling. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Maybe you remember the jellyfish fields, not the jokes, not the plot, just the image. That soft pink sky, the gentle grass moving underwater like it was tired too. You never actually saw a sunset there, but somehow it felt like dusk anyway. A moment just before night. A moment that didn't need to be real to feel real. That's how memory works sometimes. It fills in details based on emotion, not logic. Something about that stayed. You probably don't remember the exact sounds or words, but maybe you remember how your breathing changed. Maybe you remember sitting cross-legged on the floor, the carpet pressing lines into your skin, the TV buzzing lightly as it warmed the air around it. You didn't analyze the show. You absorbed it, like your heart knew what it needed long before your mind could explain it. But that wasn't where it ended. Funny how memory doesn't keep everything. It only holds onto the parts that meant something, and at the moment, or long after. The things that made your body feel safe for a while, the colors that softened your thoughts. Maybe Bikini Bottom stayed with you not because of what you heard, but because of how you felt while hearing it. More like an atmosphere than a story. More like a place you visited than a show you watched. You might have felt something like this before. Those moments where your mind remembers warmth, even when your memory forgets why. That feeling only grew stronger later. The older you get, the more you realize that memory doesn't need proof to exist. You don't need to remember the exact scene to remember the way it made the air around you feel. Certain colors, certain sounds, even certain cartoon expressions. Somehow they still echo inside you like distant voices in another room. You might not recall the reason, but your heart remembers the rhythm. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Sometimes, you'll stumble upon an old clip online, thinking you forgot everything. But then the room feels familiar again. Your shoulders relax, your breathing slows, and suddenly, you realize you never really forgot that world at all. You just tucked it away until you needed it. That's how emotional memory works. It doesn't fade the way facts do. It lingers, like a small light behind a curtain, waiting to be noticed again. Maybe that's why Bikini Bottom still follows us, even when we're not looking. Maybe it wasn't designed to impress us. It was designed to accompany us, kind of like background music in a memory you can't fully place. And maybe that's okay. Maybe meaning doesn't always need clarity. Maybe it only needs presence. Because feelings don't always ask to be understood. Sometimes they just ask to be remembered. And maybe that's why Bikini Bottom never really left. The Krusty Krab didn't feel imaginary. Not really. It had its own rhythm. Predictable, steady, familiar. The sound of doors opening, orders being called out, and the spatula hitting the grill like a drumbeat. Even the footsteps had a pattern. Squidward at the register, SpongeBob in the kitchen, Mr. Krabs checking on the money. As a kid, you didn't think about structure, but something inside you recognized it. A routine that made the world feel stable. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Life outside the TV didn't always make sense. Some days were calm, others felt messy and confusing, but the Krusty Krab stayed steady. Scenes flowed the same way, like a loop you could trust. Open the doors. Start the day. Work. Rest. Repeat. Maybe that's why it felt real. Not because it existed, but because it behaved like places we wished existed. Somewhere that kept its promises. Somewhere that didn't change without warning. Something about that pattern stayed. Maybe you remember those after-school routines. Eat dinner, finish homework, brush your teeth, go to bed. Those patterns might have been the only things keeping your day from scattering into pieces. And the Krusty Krab had that same kind of structure. No matter how chaotic SpongeBob got, the restaurant never truly fell apart. It always found its way back to normal, one order at a time. Maybe you've felt something like this before, needing routine not for excitement, but for survival. But that wasn't where it ended. The Krusty Krab wasn't just part of the show. It was an anchor. You could close your eyes and picture it clearly. The worn floor tiles, Squidward's sighs, the menu hanging slightly crooked on the wall. These details gave the place weight, as if it lived somewhere just outside reach. It didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like belonging, even if you never set foot there, even if it wasn't real. That feeling only grew stronger later. As you get older, routine stops feeling simple. It becomes something you hold on to carefully, like you're scared it might slip away. Work schedules, to-do lists, alarms, responsibilities. The real world fills with structure for the sake of progress. But the Krusty Krab wasn't about progress. It was about purpose. There's a difference. SpongeBob didn't chase success. He just wanted to do his job well. That kind of intention is rare and strangely comforting. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward, because when you rewatch the show now, it's not the jokes that stand out. It's the rhythm, the little tasks, the everyday work that gave life shape. Not glamorous, not thrilling, just steady. Maybe the Krusty Krab wasn't telling us to chase dreams. Maybe it was whispering something else. That stability has its own kind of peace. That repetition doesn't always mean boredom. Sometimes repetition means safety. And maybe that's why the Krusty Krab felt real. Not because it looked real, but because it behaved like a place we needed. A place that waited for you every morning. A place where effort mattered. A place where the day always ended the same way it started. That's all some of us ever wanted. Not all memories speak in pictures. Some speak in sounds. Soft, faint, barely noticeable, but somehow unforgettable. If you listen closely, the background of Bikini Bottom feels strangely human. Footsteps echoing lightly against sandy floors. A gentle bubbling. The distant hush of underwater wind, long before any character spoke. You probably wouldn't have noticed it as a kid, but maybe your heart did. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Those background sounds didn't demand attention. They weren't loud or dramatic. They were simply present, just like comfort often is. Not loud, not obvious, just there. You might have been sitting on your living room floor, TV light flickering softly, cereal bowl still half full, while those sounds quietly shaped how you felt. You didn't notice it happening, but you felt calmer without knowing why. Something about that stayed. Not all shows talk through characters. Some talk through atmosphere, through the space between words, the way silence fills a room, the way a sound fades instead of stops. SpongeBob didn't just fill time. It created space. Space for your mind to slow down. Space to breathe. It didn't push emotion onto you. It let you discover it naturally, inside the rhythm of every ambient hum. But that wasn't where it ended. When you revisit those old episodes now, you start noticing those sounds more. The faint shift of water when no one's moving. The way silence isn't actually empty. It's layered, textured, quietly alive. Kind of like how your own thoughts sound late at night, when the world is asleep and your mind is still awake. Soft, wandering, searching for meaning, but not too urgently. You might have felt something like this before, when silence felt like company, not loneliness. That feeling only grew stronger later. Maybe that's why thinking of SpongeBob still brings comfort, even when you're not watching it. It's not the story, it's the presence. The emotional echo left behind by those subtle sounds. The way your heart remembers softness, even when your memory forgets the details. The show didn't attach itself to your mind. It attached itself to your nervous system, gently teaching it how to slow down. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because now, when you hear the word nostalgia, it doesn't just mean remembering. It means feeling. Feeling the hum of a moment that didn't need to be special to matter. feeling the comfort of existing quietly without being judged or rushed. Bikini Bottom held that kind of stillness, a strange place that always felt alive, even when no one was speaking. Maybe that's why it stayed. Not as a story, not as a joke, but as a feeling, a reminder that some of the most meaningful things don't speak loudly. They hum, they breathe, they sit with you like quiet company. And maybe that's what comfort really is. Not answers, not certainty, just presence. The feeling that you're not alone, even when no one's talking. Funny how background sounds can hold memories better than words ever could. Sometimes, the heart remembers what the ears almost missed. Maybe the ocean never spoke because it didn't need to. Some things don't require words. They just wait. That's the kind of presence Bikini Bottom carried. Even when the screen was dark, it never felt like the world disappeared. It felt like it drifted just beneath the surface, still breathing, listening. Silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it means patience. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Late at night, when thoughts stretch longer than the room itself, imagination becomes easier, softer. You might picture the ocean of Bikini Bottom, not for answers, but for rest. The slow movement of tides, the way the water always returns even after pulling away. It doesn't rush, it doesn't panic, it simply moves at its own pace. And maybe that's what makes it comforting. It reminds us that nothing that matters truly disappears. It just waits for the right moment to return. Something about that idea stayed. When life gets loud, silence can feel unsettling, but the ocean's silence is different. It holds space. It gives your thoughts somewhere to land. You don't need to explain your feelings to it. You don't even need to understand them. You just need to watch the waves and let them move through you, like the world is showing you how to breathe again. Maybe you felt something like this before, when stillness felt safer than explanation. But that wasn't where it ended. The ocean in Bikini Bottom didn't give speeches. It watched. It waited. It stayed present in every episode, like a quiet reminder that life doesn't always need a resolution to be meaningful. Some things fade out gently, like tides, like childhood, like memories that choose not to leave. Just shift into the background and rest there, quietly, patiently. That feeling only grew stronger later. As you grew older, endings started to feel heavier. Change felt sharper. But the ocean never changed its pace. It never rushed to finish anything. It simply existed with dignity, the kind that doesn't ask to be understood. And maybe that's why it remained comforting. It wasn't teaching you how to fix things. It was teaching you how to live with them, to soften them, to let them settle instead of forcing them away. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because eventually, you may realize that peace doesn't always come from clarity. Sometimes it comes from acceptance, like the ocean accepting every wave that arrives, never fighting it, never questioning it. Bikini Bottom held that kind of peace. Not loud, not obvious, but present. The same way memories are present, even when they fade from view. And maybe that's the quiet truth the ocean was trying to tell us. Nothing important truly disappears. It just changes shape, waits quietly, and finds new ways to stay. Somewhere underwater, somewhere soft, somewhere memory and imagination meet to rest for a while. Because sometimes, nothing needs to end loudly. Sometimes, it just needs to wait. Mr. Krabs was always chasing something. As kids, it looked like greed, counting money, guarding his cash register like it was the center of the universe. It made us laugh. The over-the-top reactions, the dramatic moments, the way his eyes turned into dollar signs. But as the years passed, something about it began to feel different. Familiar. Less like a joke, and more like a mirror. But that wasn't the strange part yet. As adults, we start to understand why people hold on to things so tightly. Not because they love them, but because they're afraid to lose something they can't replace. Control doesn't always come from confidence. Sometimes it comes from fear, the kind you don't talk about, the kind you feel quietly every day when life stops making sense. And suddenly, Mr. Krabs didn't look greedy anymore. He looked scared. Something about that realization stayed. Maybe he never loved money as much as he loved certainty, predictability, a world that followed rules he could measure and count. When things felt out of control, he turned to what he understood: numbers, coins, the comfort of knowing exactly what he had. And maybe that's why his stress felt real. Because sometimes, when life starts slipping through your fingers, you cling to anything that doesn't move. But that wasn't where it ended. They say every character in Bikini Bottom represents a piece of the human mind. If that's true, maybe Mr. Krabs was the part of us that craved stability, the part that feared change, the part that believed security could be earned, collected, or protected if we just tried hard enough. But time always finds ways to remind us nothing truly stays the same, and control isn't the same as peace. You might have felt something like this before, gripping your plans too tightly, hoping they'd keep you safe. That feeling only grew stronger later. Sometimes, characters aren't jokes. They're warnings. Mr. Krabs wasn't evil. He was human. He reminded us that fear doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes, it looks like obsession. Sometimes, it sounds like someone counting their worries over and over again, hoping that adding them up will somehow make them disappear. But numbers can't fix everything. And money can't protect the heart from uncertainty. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. When you rewatch the show now, you might notice how Mr. Krabs always seems tired, like he's carrying something heavy no one else can see. Maybe that's what fear does. It makes you move fast, talk loud, chase everything just to keep from facing what's underneath. And maybe, deep down, we recognized that before we even knew the words for it. Because the older you get, the easier it is to understand why people cling to what they know, why they grip stability like a lifeline, why they protect routines that give them structure, even when those routines keep them stuck. Not because they're selfish, but because survival sometimes looks like control, and control sometimes feels safer than hope. Maybe Mr. Krabs wasn't teaching us how to chase things. Maybe he was showing us what happens when we don't learn how to let go. And maybe that lesson stayed underwater, waiting for us to grow old enough to hear it. Sandy Cheeks never really belonged in Bikini Bottom, and somehow she never needed to. The dome, the suit, the accent, everything about her reminded us she came from somewhere else. Yet she walked underwater with the confidence of someone who chose to stay. As kids, it was just funny. A squirrel living under the sea. But later in life, that idea begins to mean something more. Something a little deeper. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Some people grow up and realize they don't fit where they started. The town feels too small, the conversations too rehearsed, the expectations too heavy. And like Sandy, they learn to breathe somewhere new, even without the air they were used to. That takes courage, the kind that doesn't make noise, the kind that doesn't wait for permission, the kind you carry quietly inside your chest when everyone else thinks you're fine. Something about that stayed. Sandy didn't try to blend in. She built her own space, a dome full of memories, a little Texas under glass. She carried home with her, not as a weakness, but as proof that it still mattered. Sometimes, you don't outgrow where you started. You just learn how to live with it differently, like luggage that never fully unpacks, like an accent that never fades, even when your voice softens to adjust. It ended. Sandy was more than a scientist. She was proof that growth doesn't always happen where you're planted. Sometimes you have to move. Sometimes life pushes you out of your comfort zone. And not because you're ready, but because staying still would cost even more. Maybe you felt something like this before. Stepping into a room and feeling like everyone else already knows the rules. That feeling only grew stronger later. But Sandy never spoke like a victim. She spoke like someone who chose her path. And maybe that's why her character resonates now, more than ever, because she reminds us that strength isn't loud. Sometimes, strength is being willing to sit with loneliness until it becomes belonging, to keep trying until unfamiliar air feels natural, to stay when it would be easier to run. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. As you grow older, you start to understand that leaving home doesn't always mean leaving love behind. Sometimes it means carrying it with you, changing shape, adapting, finding new purpose. Sandy never abandoned her roots. She just refused to let them define her limits. That kind of bravery doesn't come with applause. It comes with quiet mornings, unfamiliar roads, and learning how to breathe in a place that wasn't built for you. Maybe Sandy wasn't just a character. Maybe she was a reminder. A reminder that you can still be yourself, far from where you started. That you can build a space to belong even when no one expects you to. That someday, the air that once felt foreign might feel like home. And maybe that's the real lesson Sandy carried underwater. Not that she changed to survive, but that she survived without changing who she was. That kind of courage runs deeper than the ocean. And it's still waiting for us, in every step we take away from where we began. There was something innocent about SpongeBob's happiness. It never felt rehearsed or earned. It just happened naturally, like breathing. He greeted every day with the same energy, the same optimism, the same belief that life could be good simply because it existed. As kids, we didn't question it. We just accepted it. Happiness didn't need a reason back then. It was simply the air we lived in. But that wasn't the strange part yet. As time moved forward, life changed in quiet ways. Joy started to require effort. Some mornings felt heavier than others. Maybe you woke up and realized the excitement was gone. Not loudly, but slowly, like it had faded without warning. Growing up teaches you words you never wanted to learn. Worry, pressure, exhaustion, loneliness. Happiness stops being automatic and becomes something you have to reach for, something you have to work toward. Something about that shift stayed. And looking back now, SpongeBob didn't ignore sadness. He just didn't need to understand it to live beside it. His strength wasn't pretending everything was perfect. His strength was continuing to show up. SpongeBob never fought for happiness. He simply lived in it. And maybe that was his quiet lesson, that joy doesn't always need fixing or planning. Sometimes it just needs space. But that wasn't where it ended. As adults, we start analyzing our feelings, searching for reasons, trying to diagnose every difficult mood. But kids don't do that. Kids just feel things. They experience life without trying to label it. Maybe that's why SpongeBob still feels comforting, because he represents a time before we believed that joy had to be justified. You might have felt something like this once, before life asked so much from you. That feeling only grew stronger later. SpongeBob didn't understand sadness, not because he was naive, but because he chose to look at the world through hope. He saw possibility where others saw problems. He believed every day could be meaningful, even if nothing big happened. And maybe that kind of mindset wasn't immaturity. Maybe it was courage. The courage to keep believing in light when shadows start to form. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because now, when you rewatch the show, his laughter feels different. Not silly, brave. Every joke, every smile, every moment of optimism hits deeper than it did before. It reminds you of mornings when you didn't have to explain your happiness, days when joy arrived quietly, without needing approval, times when life didn't feel like a checklist, just a moment to be lived. Maybe that's why we still return to Bikini Bottom, not to escape sadness, but to remember that joy used to feel simple. That once, emotions didn't require analysis. That maybe happiness was never lost. It just got buried, under responsibilities, under expectations, under the idea that everything had to make sense. SpongeBob didn't teach us how to avoid sadness. He taught us how to live without fearing it. And maybe that's something worth remembering. Because happiness isn't always clarity. Sometimes it's just showing up believing that joy still belongs to you, even when it takes effort to find. And maybe that's the quiet hope SpongeBob left behind, that happiness doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be allowed. Friendship in Bikini Bottom was never loud. It didn't rely on speeches or big emotional scenes. Most of the time, it was just presence. Someone standing nearby, someone walking beside you, someone laughing softly at something that wasn't even that funny. As kids, we didn't analyze it. We just knew SpongeBob and Patrick were friends, not because they said it, but because they showed up for each other, day after day. But that wasn't the strange part yet. We tend to believe friendship needs to be memorable, full of adventures, big moments, perfect pictures. But the show taught something different. It taught that sometimes connection doesn't need a spotlight. Sometimes it just needs space, a quiet companionship, a shared walk, a conversation that doesn't really say anything, but still feels comforting. Maybe that's what made their friendship so relatable, even when we didn't realize why. Something about that stayed. There were scenes when nothing major happened. SpongeBob and Patrick just sat together, or wandered around town, or stared at jellyfish drifting overhead. They didn't need to fill the silence. They didn't fear it. The quiet never felt empty. It felt full of something unspoken. And maybe that was enough. Kind of like real life. Sometimes, the best moments don't announce themselves. They just pass by gently, becoming memory without trying. But that wasn't where it ended. You might have felt a moment like this once, sitting next to a friend, saying nothing, and still feeling cared for. No pressure to talk, no need to explain what was on your mind. Just a silent understanding that someone else was there, that you didn't have to carry the day alone. In Bikini Bottom, that kind of friendship happened naturally. It wasn't earned or tested. It simply existed. That feeling only grew stronger later. Because as we grow older, friendships often get busier, harder to maintain, harder to keep simple. Schedules get in the way. Expectations grow heavier. Texts get shorter. But sometimes, what people truly need isn't constant validation. It's quiet company. The kind that doesn't need to be perfect. The kind that doesn't require energy to maintain. Just someone nearby, even if they don't have the right words to say. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Looking back at SpongeBob and Patrick now, their friendship feels like a reminder. You don't always have to impress someone to matter to them. You don't have to perform your emotions to be understood. Sometimes, just showing up is enough. And maybe friendship isn't proven in big moments, but preserved in small ones. Maybe that's why Bikini Bottom felt like home. Not because everything was perfect, but because company was never complicated. A walk together, a shared laugh, an afternoon with no real plans. That was friendship. And maybe it still is. Because the heart doesn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to stay. Even if nothing important is happening. Even if the silence lasts longer than usual. Even if all you're doing is being there. And maybe that kind of companionship is what keeps the world from feeling too heavy. Quiet company might be one of the loudest forms of love. Growing up doesn't always feel like a clean break. It's not a door closing or a screen fading to black. Most of the time, it's quieter than that, more like shifting than leaving. You carry things from childhood in small ways, tucked into routines, woven into the rhythm of your breathing. Maybe Bikini Bottom is one of those things. Not gone, just resting underwater somewhere. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Maybe growing up doesn't mean letting go. Maybe it simply means carrying things differently, softer, like memories underwater, still there, just quieter. You may not talk about SpongeBob anymore. You might not remember full episodes. But you might still remember how it felt to sit in front of the TV after school, shoes still on, backpack forgotten, thoughts finally slowing down, little echoes that never fully faded. Something about that stayed. Even now, there might be moments when a familiar color, a distant sound, or a random joke reminds you of that slow, safe pace of childhood. It's not dramatic. It's not a rush of nostalgia. It's subtle, like hearing something from another room and realizing it's not meant to call you back, just to let you know it's still there. A soft reminder that your past isn't lost. It's just quieter now. But that wasn't where it ended. You don't have to return to childhood to appreciate it. Sometimes, remembering is enough. Sometimes, feeling a small echo is enough. You might have felt this walking home on a breezy night, or hearing laughter from a nearby house, or seeing cartoon colors in the corner of your memory. It's not a call to go back. It's a comfort in knowing you once felt calm, and that calm still lives in you somewhere. That feeling only grew stronger later, because maybe Bikini Bottom wasn't a place you outgrew. Maybe it was a feeling, one built from simplicity, safety, and the freedom to exist without pressure. The kind of feeling you might search for as an adult, without realizing you've been searching for it at all. The world got louder. They stacked higher, but somewhere deep inside, that ocean still moves slowly, waiting for you to notice it again. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. As time goes on, you begin to understand that carrying memories isn't childish. It's human. They don't weigh you down. They give shape to who you've become. SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward. They don't feel like characters anymore. They feel like reflections of different parts of yourself. Hope, rest, fatigue, patience. Maybe growing up means recognizing those parts without judging them. Maybe Bikini Bottom never wanted to pull you back. Maybe it wanted to walk with you forward quietly, gently, like an echo traveling with the tide. Not to bring back the past, but to remind you it mattered. Because even in a loud world, there was once a place where things were calm enough to simply exist. And maybe that feeling still belongs to you. Sometimes, memory feels more like a tide than a timeline. It doesn't move in straight lines. It drifts, it comes, and goes. Some days it rises, other days it fades into the background like a soft echo. Thinking about Bikini Bottom now, it doesn't feel like a show. It feels more like a memory from a place we never lived in, but somehow belonged to anyway. That's the strange thing about emotional safety. It doesn't need to be real to feel true. But that wasn't the strange part yet. You don't remember every scene. You might not even remember character names or exact plot lines. But the feeling stayed. The calm, the warmth, the sense that life didn't need to be perfect to feel okay. Memory works like that sometimes. It brings back what your heart needed, even if your mind forgot the details. Like tiny waves that wash over you during quiet nights, reminding you that comfort doesn't always need logic. Sometimes, it just needs space. Something about that lingers still. Late at night, when thoughts grow louder than the TV ever did, you might find yourself drifting back there, to jellyfish drifting in slow motion, to Squidward's sighs, to the sound of underwater breeze that didn't exist, but somehow felt real anyway. Maybe you weren't escaping life back then. Maybe you were learning how to survive it. Through softness, through routine, through the kind of peace that didn't demand attention. But that wasn't where it ended. Sometimes, imagination and memory overlap quietly. The mind goes searching through your history, not for facts, but for feelings. A safe place, a lighter moment, a rhythm to breathe to. And maybe that's where Bikini Bottom still lives. Not as a show, not as nostalgia, but as a quiet ocean inside your memory. It doesn't need to be seen to exist. It doesn't need to be loud to matter. You might have felt something like this before, when comfort arrived without a reason. That feeling only grew stronger later. As life becomes more complicated, we often search for clarity. But memory doesn't promise clarity. It promises connection. Those tiny waves of familiarity that rise up unexpectedly, like someone tapping gently on the door of your mind. You don't open it fully, but you let it stay nearby. You let it remind you that softness once existed, that you once knew a place where calm didn't require explanation. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because maybe Bikini Bottom never truly left. Maybe the ocean only sank a little deeper, tucked into the spaces between your thoughts, waiting patiently for the moments you need it most. It doesn't rush. It doesn't ask. It just waits. And when life gets heavy, the tide comes back, not to pull you away, but to remind you of gentler waters. Waters you didn't imagine. Waters you felt. Maybe Bikini Bottom was never just a town. Maybe it was, and still lies a memory choosing to breathe quietly inside you. Not to rewind your life. Because sometimes, emotional safety isn't about return, it's about recognition. The recognition that past comfort can still exist in the present, even if it only arrives as small, quiet waves. As if the ocean never left, it simply moved somewhere softer. There's a moment late at night when things start to change. The world outside the windows even the air feels slower, like the room itself knows you're worn out. Streetlights glow a little softer. Distant cars turn into gentle hums. Your thoughts stop racing and begin to drift, almost like they're underwater. And maybe that's why nighttime sometimes feels like the deep sea. Not scary, just still. A place where noise can't quite reach you. But that wasn't the strange part yet. When it's that quiet, the mind doesn't necessarily relax, but it does slow down. Thoughts spread out, moving gently instead of piling up. You don't need to force calmness. The silence does some of the work for you. Breathing softens. Your body settles into the mattress. And maybe sleep doesn't feel like falling at all. Maybe it's more like sinking, slowly, into softness, not to escape, just to rest. Something about that moment stays. There's a kind of peace that shows up when you stop trying to find it. The fridge hums in the background. The glow from your phone screen fades. The ceiling becomes blurry, like it's floating above you. SpongeBob's ocean starts to make sense in a new way, not as a place to run to, but as a feeling your mind remembers when it's too tired to keep explaining itself. But that wasn't where it ended. Sometimes anxiety doesn't vanish, it just loses energy. Worries don't always need answers. They just need room to breathe. Maybe that's why nighttime silence can feel like the deep sea. You're not fighting your thoughts. You're watching them drift, letting them go where they need to. Kind of like how without trying, moving with the current instead of against it. You might have felt something like this before, when letting go felt easier than holding on. That feeling only grew stronger later, because the deeper the night gets, the less you need clarity. The world doesn't feel so loud anymore. In that space, where sound fades, and time softens. Calmness doesn't need instructions. It just needs permission to exist, like breathing underwater. Not real, but possible in your mind. Possible enough to settle the heartbeat that's been working overtime all day. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. You start to realize that peace doesn't always come as answers. Sometimes it just comes as silence. Not empty silence, but gentle silence. Silence that wraps itself around your thoughts instead of pushing them away. The deep sea of nighttime feels like that, like a blanket made of stillness, like the air itself is saying, no more effort needed tonight. Maybe that's why imagining Bikini Bottom at night feels comforting. It's not about nostalgia. It's about rhythm, about remembering a pace that didn't hurt to follow, a pace that let you exist without performing. The ocean never rushed, and maybe that's the lesson. Sleep doesn't have to be a victory. Rest doesn't have to be earned. Maybe, just for tonight, sinking into soft, not answers, not solutions. Just a moment where sound fades and thoughts move quietly, like they're returning to the deep sea. And maybe that's all you need to carry into sleep. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a feeling, a quiet sense that nothing is being asked of you. Maybe that's why Bikini Bottom felt like home. You could arrive tired, quiet, even a little lost, and it didn't judge you. It never waited for explanations. It didn't ask you to earn happiness. It just let you exist. And sometimes, that's all the heart really wants. Space to exist without conditions. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Some places welcome you before they even know your name. They don't evaluate you. They don't ask for a reason. They simply open their doors. Finding that kind of presence can be difficult. Rooms grow crowded with expectations. Conversations become tests. People ask how you're doing, but they're really asking if you're okay enough to keep going. And suddenly, the idea of belonging becomes complicated. Something about that longing stays. Bikini Bottom was different. You could show up in any mood and still be part of the story. SpongeBob would greet you like every day was a fresh start. Patrick would sit beside you without asking what was wrong. Squidward might sigh, but even that felt familiar, not hurtful. Each character lived as themselves, without pretending. They kept their quirks, their flaws, their hopes, their tiredness, and somehow it worked. Not because they changed, but because they accepted one another. But that wasn't where it ended. Maybe that's why it felt like home. Perfect, not peaceful every moment. Just honest. Honest enough to remind us that belonging doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes, it's as simple as being allowed to show up as you are. Maybe you felt something like this before, in the presence of someone who didn't ask you to explain your silence, who didn't pressure you to smile, but still made space for you anyway. That feeling only grew stronger later. Memories like that don't disappear, because time passes. They settle quietly, like dust on a windowsill, still there, still catchable in the right light. And when you're older, maybe that's what nostalgia really is. It gives you permission to remember kindness without proof. To return, not physically, but emotionally, to a place that once felt safe. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. because the more you grow, the clearer it becomes. Home isn't always something you build. Sometimes it's something you carry. A memory of being accepted. A moment where no one demanded anything from you. Bikini Bottom didn't make you perform happiness. It simply reminded you that it used to come naturally, and that maybe it still can. Some places don't wait to be relived. They wait to be remembered, softly, gently, like a light left on for you, even when you weren't sure you were coming back. Maybe that's the real kind of home, not a building, but a feeling that lets you breathe, without needing to explain why. And maybe that feeling still knows your name. Maybe we never truly outgrew Bikini Bottom. Maybe it grew alongside us. When we were kids, we loved the jokes. As teens, we started noticing the tiredness in Squidward. And as adults, we learned what it means to keep going anyway. It's strange how a cartoon can reveal different pieces of life, depending on when you watch it. Almost like it waited for us to catch up. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Maybe that's why this world stayed with us. Not because it resisted change, but because it changed in a way that matched us. SpongeBob's joy used to sound easy. Now it sounds brave. Patrick's calm used to seem silly. Now it feels rare. Mr. Krab's stress used to be funny. Now it's familiar. And Bikini Bottom itself never felt frozen in time. It felt like it was quietly aging with us, learning new meanings each year we grew older. Something about that idea stayed. It's easy to think we left childhood behind, packed it away, traded it in for responsibilities and schedules. But maybe things didn't work that way. Maybe the world we grew up with didn't vanish. It simply faded into the background like a song still playing somewhere down the hallway. Not forgotten, just softer. And sometimes, when life feels heavy, that song gets louder again, just long enough to remind us we're not alone. But that wasn't where it ended. Shows like SpongeBob didn't stick because they were brilliant. They stuck because they were honest. They didn't try to be more than they were. They just stayed. And maybe that kind of consistency matters more than we realized. Life changes quickly. People leave, expectations grow, time gets strange. But Bikini Bottom always opened its doors the same way. SpongeBob still woke up smiling. Squidward still sighed. Patrick still showed up, without a reason. You might have felt something like this before, when familiar things started to mean something new. That feeling only grew stronger later. As we age, we don't need reminders of childhood. We need reminders of meaning. Reminders that when life felt simpler, it also felt softer. And softness isn't childish. It's human. SpongeBob didn't stay the same because it refused to grow. It stayed the same so we could grow through it, seeing new layers, new reflections, new versions of ourselves in characters we thought we already knew. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Maybe Bikini Bottom was never meant to stay behind us. Maybe it walked with us, quietly, through teenage years, early adulthood, lonely nights, quiet drive homes, empty classrooms, overfilled calendars. And maybe remembering it isn't escaping reality. Maybe it's acknowledging it, that we felt things early, that we learned to care early, that we've always carried more than we thought we could. Maybe we didn't outgrow Bikini Bottom. Maybe we grew into it. Maybe that world never stopped speaking. We just got old enough to finally understand what it was saying. And sometimes, that's enough to feel less alone. Maybe Bikini Bottom was never just underwater. Maybe it was a mirror, one that reflected parts of us we didn't always understand. Back when the world felt too loud, it showed us a quieter version of living. It helped us breathe when we didn't know we were holding our breath. It held our hope, our confusion, our dreams, without ever asking us to explain them. And maybe that's why it stayed. Not loud, not urgent, just present. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The ocean never rushed to speak. It stayed still long enough for us to hear ourselves. Maybe that's what makes it powerful. Not its waves, but its patience. Silence doesn't always mean emptiness. Sometimes, silence means a moment is listening. And late at night, when thoughts begin to drift, that kind of silence can feel like the safest place in the world. Something about that comfort lingers. Bikini Bottom didn't ask us to be happy. It just asked us to exist. It showed us characters who carried their feelings honestly. Hope, fatigue, confusion, joy. Each one allowed to breathe in the space they were given. Maybe that's why it felt real. Maybe that's why, even now, thinking of that ocean still softens the mind a little, like someone turning down the volume on a busy day. But that wasn't where it ended. Maybe the ocean isn't meant to answer everything. Maybe its stillness is its message. The way clouds drift slowly across the sky, or how city lights flicker through half-closed blinds late at night. It doesn't need to be loud to matter. Maybe meaning doesn't always need clarity. Maybe memories don't need proof. You might have felt something like this before, when peace arrived quietly, just when you stopped searching for it. That feeling only grew stronger later, because the older we get, the more we understand that calmness isn't weakness. Softness isn't failure. It takes strength to live gently in a loud world. And maybe the ocean in Bikini Bottom was our first lesson in that, a reminder that we can hold confusion and hope at the same time, that we can be tired without giving up, that we can listen without responding. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because maybe tonight, nothing needs to be solved. Maybe answers aren't needed as much as peace. Maybe the ocean doesn't want you to figure it out. Maybe it only wants you to rest, knowing it will still be there when you wake up. Not gone, not broken, just waiting, like a quiet memory at the edge of sleep. Maybe Bikini Bottom will never feel like a town again. Maybe it will feel like a reflection, a mirror, reminding us that parts of childhood never really left. They just learned how to live quietly in softer corners of our minds. And maybe that's enough. Maybe we'll never find every lost episode. But maybe we don't need to. Some memories weren't meant to be proven, only remembered. If tonight felt calm, even just a little, then that's enough. Sleep well. Dream softly. Good night.